Hector, we know ultimately the fault of a failed campaign falls on the candidate, but how much of the fault falls on the campaign manager and the advisor? And you were a former candidate, so I really wanted to ask you this question, and then Niko can comment after.
Yeah, I would say that 0% of the fault falls on the campaign manager and the advisors. I think that, you know, as a candidate, you really have to control the sort of staff that you bring around yourself. You have to know what your strategy is for winning, and I think it's ultimately on you to execute. I think it's sort of like very low for candidates who lose to turn around and to say, oh, well, I was getting bad advice, or well, my staff wasn't as good, because ultimately you choose your staff. And so if you couldn't choose the right staff, you obviously, there's a reason why you weren't able to clinch that victory. So yeah, you know, I take 100% of the responsibility for my campaign. I would never turn around and say, oh, well, it was the campaign manager's fault, it was my advisor's fault, because ultimately it was my choice to hire that campaign manager to bring those advisors around. And so I would say when a campaign loses, 0% of the fault goes to the staff or the advisors, and the reverse is true when you win. If you were to win, then 100% of the victory goes to your staff and to your advisors, and you should, as a candidate, be humble enough to give the people who deserve that victory their just desert.
Gotcha, definitely. And just before I let Niko talk, I thought of this question because I thought about Bernie synopsis and people who go back and see what happened to the Bernie 2020 campaign, and you hear a lot of the same names coming up, like Jeff Weaver just giving bad advice, even all the way back to 2016. So I was thinking about that, but I totally agree with what you said. Who put Jeff Weaver in that position to begin with? All right, Niko, jump on in.
No, I would 100% agree. And I would say I don't like speaking as far as in like the absolutes of winning and losing, because like I feel like victories when it comes to progressives do look a little bit different. And it's not necessarily, you know, achieved by an office title. However, I would say the end result of any campaign solely falls on the shoulders of whoever's campaign it is. And what I mean by that is, look at what's happening right now with, you know, Bernie, just because you use him as an example. And I understand Jeff Weaver was a bad apple, like 100%. But Jeff Weaver didn't dismiss Breonna Joy Gray after the campaign was over, when they tried to, remember that whole situation went down where they were like, well, you know, she's not voting for Biden. And he just kind of like scoffed, like, well, she's not on our payroll anymore. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, you know, Bernie's son decided recently that he wanted to kind of, I don't want to say ridicule, but he kind of went at Nina Turner's neck a bit for speaking at the Move for People. Like that's he called it counterproductive for speaking at the MPP convention. Didn't challenge election integrity. Didn't want to actually call out Joe Biden to the degree that we know he should have been called out. Wanted to pretend as if Warren was an ally whenever we had every indication that she was not an ally to this movement. And so we could talk about the bad advice from Jeff Weaver. We can talk about the corruption within the DNC. But ultimately, Bernie was in a very, very unique position where he had the apparatus to handle all of that and chose not to. And so we can't deflect blame. Jeff did what Jeff was going to do. But on the other side of that fence, like Hector said, if they would have won South Carolina, Nina would have been the person I gave all the credit to, because of how hard she worked. But at the end of the day, the end result is on the shoulders of the candidate, and it's up to them to fight the hardest and also, you know, be the smartest at the same time.
Man, I appreciate you guys so much. I got my man Niko House, who giving me his inside experience. I got my man Hector Oseguera, who ran last time, and he gave his experience as an actual candidate. How often do you get to hear this side of the fence from the actual candidate? I really enjoyed this. I hope to see you again in the future on another episode down the line. Put in your comment below, what would you like to see more of? Who would you like me to interview? Who would you like to see on the show? And what questions to ask? Once again, guys, thank you so much for coming out. Appreciate it.
Appreciate you, man.
Thank you so much for having me.